Good morning, everybody. How's everyone doing? Awesome. How was the keynote? I missed it because I had to prep for this. I think it's like any presentation, you're always doing your slides until the very last second. So hopefully you guys enjoyed it for me on my behalf. So I'm Christian, and I think it's really awesome for you guys today. You're going to get two talks in one today. So when Tracy and I submitted this talk about 4 or 5 months ago, we really wanted to talk about the partnership that we have with DeployHub and what we're doing together, and how our two pieces of technology really fit together. So what you're going to get today is talking about the cultural transformation that can occur in your organization when you start adopting principles like release management, release automation, and really some of the benefits that you gain from a soft skills perspective. So how many people here, just a show of hands, are already using GitHub today at work? Awesome. So you guys are already seeing some of the benefit. How many of you have all of your repositories open by default? Come on, guys, we got to do it. So that's where I want to kind of take this talk today. I want us to get us into that perspective of thinking like an open source project, an open source enterprise organization, and thinking about where we can get to from there. So to kind of start this off, give you a little bit of background about who I am. My name is Christian Weber. I'm a senior solutions engineer at GitHub. I've been with GitHub for about 3 years now, and what I focus on really is a couple of different things. I focus on community growth within enterprise organizations. I think for us as enterprise software developers, we have thought about our practice in a non-community standpoint, and seeing what the open source community has done in terms of driving that sort of community growth for software developers really applies to the enterprise. So that's a lot of what I do, is a lot of advocacy around that. Now, my background was financial technology and financial services. So I wasn't a traditional developer by any sense of the word. I was more in systems administration, doing a lot of architecture, a lot of financial trade management and execution systems administration. But as our industry evolved, I started doing more things like scripting and more automation, and trying to solve a lot of rote and daily minutia tasks. So my background coming from that started moving into things like Python and really the technologies from around there. So this really excites me because I think we've got a really good amount of potential and a lot of movement around being able to bring these principles into the forward play. So now, if we think about the history of software development and where our industry is, our industry itself is only about 60 years old, right? And if I think about some of the first major software development projects that were built, the first one that I think of and that comes to mind for me is the Apollo 11 project that was led and written and managed by Margaret Hamilton and her group of engineers at NASA, right? Fantastic project. And for the 1960s, it was complex. It was 100,000 lines of code. We had a small group of developers working in a small, tight-knit team, and they were able to build a culture of trust and transparency because they were only within that small group. Now, if we jump forward, even 15, 20 years after the Apollo 11 project, and I apologize if my dates are wrong, if we go to the space shuttle, we saw a 4 times increase in the complexity and the amount of code that we're writing, and we started seeing started seeing more teams working on code from there as well. And if we keep going more and more forward, we see this is a linear growth pattern in terms of the software development projects that we're working on, meaning that we're not only focusing on small projects like an Apollo 11 rocket or the space shuttle, we're now having things like the Ford F-150 constituting 150 million lines of code. These things are moving data centers at this point. Not only that, the people that are working on this code are all over the world, because what a lot of enterprise organizations have figured out is that the talent that we're trying to bring into the enterprise is not just in one location, it's in many locations. And so when you have developers and engineers and administrators that are all over the world, how do we figure out what that culture change and that modernization looks like, right? And so if we think about it, and we think about driving that culture change of trust and transparency, and we think about building that community, if we think about what Mark Andreessen said in 2005, that every company is a software company, he was absolutely right 100%. Because if you look at every company that is out there today, not only are they reliant on software services, but themselves are writing software to drive business value. So what does that mean? It means that we have to figure out ways to beat our competition. We have to figure out ways to be better in the marketplace. So I think when our CEO came on stage last year at GitHub Universe, he said that every company is an innovation company, and I'm 100% on board with that. And so if we think about what it means to be an innovation company, it's like what I just said. It is, how do we get to that point where we are delivering better product, right? And the way I think about that is building that community growth, right? Because the only way that we innovate is through trust. Because as human beings, we don't do our best work unless we feel like we're part of a group and we feel like that we're trusted by our own individuals. Simon Sinek's got a really great book that he wrote about 5 years ago called Leaders Eat Last. And what he talks about is sort of the lions and the antelope strategy, right? He says that antelopes, when they're out in the field and they sense danger from a lion, the only thing that they can do is go into survival mode, right? There is no concept of being able to relax, to be able to socialize, and to be able to work as part of the antelope community until they get eaten by the lion, right? Because they're in survival mode. So if we think about that and how we can apply that to the community space of being a software developer, if I'm constantly fighting a bureaucracy, if I'm constantly fighting to get my changes in, or like in my own experience, if I wanted a new version of Matplotlib that supported pie charts, I would have to fight for 3 or 4 months to get that done. And I'm in that survival mode of not being able to innovate because I have this really great idea that I want to work on, but I've got a technical blocker in my way. So how do I innovate in sort of that sort of realm, right? It's a complete context switch in the way that we're thinking about software development, right? Because I think at the end of the day, everyone speaks software. It doesn't matter if we are software developers or if we're the person bringing the idea to the software developer. It doesn't matter if we're the engineer working on the product or if we are the end user that is working on that as well. We are all working on the same thing. So what that requires us to do is to all get on the same page. And if we think about traditional software development practices, we've really brought ourselves into these silos, right? We have really brought a transactional model to the way that we view knowledge, right? I think one of the greatest things that software development is doing in terms of building all this automation and all these release management pipelines is it's really allowing us to get rid of all of the daily tasks that we have to work on a daily basis, all the repeatable things, and really get us into that mode of where we're all becoming a part of the same value proposition. The context of what we're doing today is not necessarily a developer takes in a requirement file, writes a series of requirements, sends that over the wall to QA, and then kicks it over the wall to be never seen again. We're all on board. We're all building that community and that organization from there. So how do we do that? Because I can tell you these big picture ideas and it sounds great. But if I'm a leader in an organization, or if I'm a boots on the ground soldier, or engineer, sorry, or we are kind of soldiers though a little bit. If we think about that, there are concepts and there are practices that really have to allow us to see that. And so at GitHub, what we've really seen is it comes down to 3 principles, right? It comes down to collaboration, it comes down to quality code, and it comes down to automation. When you add all of those three things up, that's where you start getting the culture definition that will allow you to succeed within your enterprise organization in terms of any sort of modernization effort that comes in. I don't like using the word DevOps. I don't like using the word DevSecOps or whatever the new hotness is. I think it's all about just modernizing and getting people on the same page. And so what I mean by collaboration is, again, that community style of software development. There's a psychologist out there by the name of Peter Block who does a lot of research into community building. And he says that organizations have 2 models of the way that they do communities, right? Communities can be either restorative or they can be retributive. And so what do I mean by that? I mean that a community in a traditional retributive, or what we may commonly understand as a command and control sort of structure, is that if I release a bug to production, right, how do we manage that today? Well, we'll probably have a meeting about it. We'll figure out who the person was that released that bug. We'll figure out, we'll accuse them of doing something, and I've been there. I cost my company like $230,000 in executed trades once because, side tangent, because I reset sequence numbers in the wrong way. Now, any of us that do like execution and trade systems management, it's the worst thing ever when you do that because trades just get replayed. And so I was in a retributive community, right? And, having to go through that whole sort of analysis of like why this happened and why I was up at 4 o'clock in the morning trying to figure this out and why I didn't do it this one way or the other, it made me feel really bad, right? And so I'm not able to do my best work. Now, if we think about a restorative community, it's a complete change of pace in terms of how we're delivering software and how we're actually viewing software. So what is a restorative community? Well, it's one that, first of all, knowledge is a communal resource. It's not, again, what I said earlier, a transactional model where I am delivering a piece of information to a pull request and expecting something in return. I am delivering a pull request with knowledge that I'm giving to the community and giving back to the organization as a whole. So when I think about that idea of being open by default, that's one of the first core tenets of any sort of modernization effort that we see at GitHub to help succeed in that. So getting into that mindset of if I have code that can't be shared for compliance and legal reasons, that's fine. But I also need to have a goal of abstraction to say that anything that isn't IP or isn't code that needs to be held from any other part of the organization, we're just going to keep that open and allow people to contribute and share. Now, moving on to those other 2 points, it's about quality and automation. And that's where our relationship with Deploy Hub comes into play, because what we're now seeing is when you start applying your quality and your automation as part of your pipeline, that's where you start driving the growth. And it's about breaking down silos. I can give you a couple of examples, but really what we're trying to do is two things, I think, most importantly. It's that we're trying to break down horizontal barriers. One, so we reduce the cost of bugs that are being delivered to production by increasing knowledge and increasing visibility across many lines of business. But it's also about empowering the individual engineer within these silos to be able to work on the projects that they want to work on and understand what the rest of the business is doing. One of the best and worst projects that I ever worked on in financial services was I got to write and maintain a compliance rules engine for a large financial services organization. And it was the first large software development project that I worked on. And I was really excited. I got to use technologies that I was somewhat comfortable with and some technologies that I wasn't. Huge learning experience for me and the people that I was working with. The problem was I worked in a very small segment of the business. We were what we called a sort of a startup within the organization. We were reselling our software to other hedge funds, and it was a pretty cool thing to do. So months passed. I got this piece of software delivered, and I was really proud of it. And I don't know about a lot of us in technology, but I know from my own perspective, I've got a little bit of an ego when I'm really proud of something. Anybody guilty of that? Just me? Okay, that's fine. But I was really proud of it, and so I was bragging a little bit about it. And so I said, okay, I'm working on this thing, and I'm talking to another engineer friend of mine. And I said, hey, I've been working on this thing called the CRE. I'm using Python 3. I've got some really nice charting that I've done with it, and it's really awesome. All I need is a flat file from a business analyst. It loads it into the engine, and then out comes all these like really cool algorithms and all these nice reports in one nice, easy-to-read format. And I'd spent a lot of work on it. I was really proud of it. And the response that I got from my colleague was a shrug of the shoulders in silence, right? And I'm like, okay, well, maybe he just doesn't get it. And I go, well, what do you think about that? And he goes, that's really cool and all, but he goes, we did the same thing upstairs. And I go, no way. Not only was this guy a senior software engineer, and he had about 4 or 5 years of experience on top of me, so I didn't get to leverage his experience. I wasn't able to save the company money because I didn't necessarily know that code was out there and that didn't exist. And so not only was there a lack of visibility, but there was a waste of resources on my part in terms of what we thought about in terms of the projects that I was working on. So bringing that all together, if I think about collaboration, quality, and automation, or in this case, Agile, DevOps, and InnerSource, I'm a big fan of Venn diagrams, especially when in the groups of 3. I think if we think about the outer rings as our capabilities, what we're really trying to do is get to that middle segment of culture and transparency. We can think about inner sourcing, we can think about Agile, we can think about DevOps, But really what we want to do is add all of these things up. And we want to be able to engage that sort of digital transformation. That's the only buzzword I like. So we think about delivery and execution. We think about automation and security. And then my favorite one is the inner sourcing. It's the taking the principles of the open source development movement and applying that to the enterprise space. I'm running out of time here before I have to hand off to Tracy. So I will say I'm happy to talk to you about those tenets at the booth today. But that's where we're at with that. What we're trying to do here, again, is get to a concept where we're moving away from left brain processes. And this is why I'm here at Jenkins World and DevOps World and talking about this. Because I think what Jenkins and the continuous integration movement has done is gotten rid of all the boring unit testing that I don't like to do, and I don't think a lot of us like to do, even though we're CI fanatics in this space, and move into a concept where we're focusing on right brain problems. We're focusing on strategy. We're actually delivering high business value to our organizations because as engineers, we really love context. It allows us that trust and that transparency, which then builds that community. Because if we can automate all of the left brain stuff and automate all of the boring things, that's where we really focus and that's where we start really shining within the organization. When you add up all of those things, this is what you get. You move away from this idea of waterfall management or waterfall software development or water scrumfall, I think was what I heard a little bit ago. And you move into a process where you're just constantly moving because release management and release delivery is a moving target. And the software that we're going to release is never going to be finished. So we need a process that doesn't necessarily look at sort of a capability, but more of a not as a maturity model where there's an endpoint, but more of what is my software currently capable of and how can I move forward? And it's this sort of workflow and this sort of process that really allows for that to shine. And we're big fans of this. We're big proponents of this. And this is what we do at GitHub internally. This is our software development model. So if I abstract that previous slide into what we think about in terms of like an individual software development process, it's the GitHub flow. One of the scariest things, I think, for any software development organization, especially when they're looking at modern tooling, is when you look at Git flow for the first time. I think some of us have probably Googled that image. It's a very complex way of doing software development, right? It's pretty scary. Let's take it to a single branching model where we're constantly merging our code back in. And what that does is it builds collaboration, it builds auditability, it builds workflow management, and it builds all of our security and our compliance into our software development process. So I'm going to leave you with that, and I'm going to hand this off to Tracy here. But the one thing that I want to leave you off with in terms of what I've talked about today is trust each other and start thinking about building that community within your organization. I'm not going to tell you how to build your community because that's not my prerogative. But start thinking about better ways that you can start trusting yourselves within your organization. With that said, I'm going to hand off to Tracy, who's one of our great partners at GitHub in terms of their software. And I really want you to kind of give a clap for her. Thank you.
So I'm Tracy Reagan. I'm the CEO of DeployHub. I've been doing what we used to call software configuration management, application lifecycle management. Now it's called DevOps. My entire career started in Wall Street and ended up building a couple of companies around this space. So just to kind of see where we're at, we kind of have to look back to where we've come from. And as we change the culture within our organizations to try to achieve what Christian just described, we really have to understand where we are now and be honest about it. Globalization has really increased the need for the collaboration that Christian is talking about. And this inner sourcing, the idea of inner sourcing and reusability is going to become even more apparent as we move into microservices, which we're going to talk a little bit about. So a change in the culture will definitely drive release automation, and release automation will drive the change in the culture. So if we just take a look back at the waterfall culture, we know a few things about it because some of us are kind of still doing it. Waterfall practices are risk averse. They're slow and methodical. You know, 6-month release cycles are not unusual. That's actually a fast release cycle in waterfall. High frequency releases is equal to failure. If you do it in the waterfall practice, if you're doing a release on a regular basis, it means your code is bad. Sarbanes-Oxley was forcing us to have a separation of duties. How many people still have to hear that? Yeah, quite a few of us. Sarbanes-Oxley is real and it's still out there. And if you really think about it, in the waterfall, the value of knowledge is greater to the individual. It's not necessarily the other way around. So then this happened. We decided to learn Agile. And some companies did a great job. Some companies didn't do such a great job. But I think Dilbert kind of describes that experience. So then what occurred is the Agile Hero. And many of you in this room are probably strap on the Superman outfit and make sure that your CI server still runs. You can fix a build in 10 minutes, but maybe somebody else can't, and you're still working with scripts that drive the deployments. Now, I know you love your scripts, but there's issues with them, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. But what we want to get to in Agile, and what we always tried, and I could have put the manifesto up here as well, but we really want to design and code in an iterative way because we're about getting innovation to end users as quickly as possible. So if you want to do that, you really need to start collaborating on shared code bases. Infrequent releases is equal to failure. It's exactly the opposite from where we've been. So we have to understand that as we work with operation teams who are still in this mindset. And value of knowledge is greater to the group than rather to the individual. So it's a complete difference between where we've been. We really are shifting 100%. So we have a balancing act to achieve. We really need to be able to provide dev teams and operation teams what they absolutely need to do their jobs. On the dev side, we have to have a continuous pipeline to end users, which is a push, right? It's a push deployment. Push delivery across the life cycle. That's really what we're trying to achieve here with this continuous process improvement, basically. And we have to, sometimes we want to sacrifice control and transparency for speed. And that is completely an opposite with what the operation teams are needing to do. So in your cultural transformation, you have to be able to understand on the operations side what developers are trying to do, and developers need to understand that operation teams like planned releases. They want to release train. They like to pull delivery when it's approved. They want to have an approval process. In a continuous delivery pipeline, we need to speed up the approval process and make it self-service. And we have to and then on the opposite side, they want to sacrifice the speed for an audit. So we have to provide them audit controls and audit reports in order for us to be able to achieve this. So down here on the bottom, automate manual steps to reduce risk, add collaboration, and that will increase your speed. So I could have put the Venn diagram down there, but it looked weird. So we have to build trust. And as Christian pointed out, trust is a big issue within our organizations between dev and ops. But we really have to be on the same team now. And if we're practicing Agile, we are. Site reliability engineers, how many of you have that role, or DevOps engineer? I see more and more of those types of titles every day. So dev and ops has got to start sharing and collaborating. It's the only way to achieve it. We can't achieve this new digital transformation unless we do that. And DevOps task must be really self-service. We have to get to a point where this stuff is automated and we're not trying to debug a script. So I like to talk about the trusted partner is a really good way to do this. And many of you probably are serving as the trusted partner, but you don't have that proper designation. And what I mean by that is that by defining a developer who works with the operation teams and knows how to listen to them. So when you're going out and you're building your own CI/CD pipeline, you understand the requirements of your users. And your users are also operations teams. And what's that going to allow you to do? It's going to allow you to start taking over more of the deployment process, because you will be able to provide the operation teams with a level of trust, reports, and audit that they're required to produce. So listen to them. And if you're on the operations side of the house, you have to begin to understand that every single team is not going to use the same tooling. Most of you probably have built out your own processes on your own, and you want to drive your project the way you want to drive it. You don't want to have to wait and then throw it over the proverbial wall. That is going back to water, scrum, fall. And that in many ways is a failure. I don't know how many of you have started to hear this term value chain, but this is something that the analysts like to come up with terminology all the time. But value chain is something that's referred to in manufacturing and in hard products. And it's about when they have a new design, how quickly that new design gets to the end users. And most of your release automation tooling around your continuous delivery pipeline, what you want to be able to do is say, I had a commit on Friday, and by Tuesday we had it out to end user. Or even quicker. If you're Netflix, you do it daily, thousands a day. So value chain is something that upper management's starting to look at, and it's something that operation teams are being asked about, so you need to be able to track that. Some of these tools obviously build that on that value chain. And your CI/CD pipeline obviously should include things from the commit all the way around to a deployment and being able to track that through endpoints. So let's jump to where we're going with this and why all this is more important now than it ever has been. And we'll talk a little bit about the cloud and Kubernetes and Docker and microservices. So we're not just a cloud anymore. We are actually going away from a cloud virtual a VM machine image. We are starting to now go into the new data center, which is going to be built around probably Kubernetes. It seems like it's winning. The new server will be Docker, and what you'll be writing is microservices. So the biggest change that you're going to be facing, and the scariest one for everybody on dev and ops, is moving away from monolithic applications to decomposed and independently deployable components. So your life is no longer one big make file, or one big make script, or one big build script, or however you do it. It's no longer one big RPM to install your entire package. Everything has to be broken down. Environment variables have to be broken down. The database has to be broken down, and everything in between. So if you think about what that looks like, what that's going to look like, and microservices, you're going to have maybe a team that's writing the front end, and they're going to do a drop-down list or a standard error routine, and that's going to be one of those services. And you're not going to have in the old days of object-oriented programming, we really tried this and we sort of failed. What we have to be able to do is succeed this time because it's critical. And remember that in microservices, in the old days we did a compile and link, right? We're not going to link anymore. We're going to compile, and we're going to have a service mesh that's not only going to do the linking, it's going to do the request routing. So we have to keep in mind how we're going to adjust to this new world. And as you build out your CI/CD pipelines, you don't want to build it in a monolithic way. And monolithic should have gone away with Agile practices, because in Agile you make one little change and you send it out. But I see very few companies who are able to do one little change, only compile that little change, and only release that little change. And it's oftentimes because we're thinking monolithic and we build monolithic scripts. So let's just break it out in a bicycle. If we're building a bicycle, we've got a frame, we've got wheels, we've got a chain assembly, we've got a seat, and we've got a handlebars. Those are our microservices that has a monolithic equivalent of version v20.6 of our bicycle. Now, even though these are unique little pieces, what it really looks like is soup. It's a big microservices soup. And the service mesh is what determines what our monolithic equivalent is. So on the other side of that service mesh, we have to figure it out. So when we pass it into this service mesh, we're going to know what reusable code we're pointing to and what the monolithic equivalent actually is. It's a big change, right? It's completely different from what we've done before. And it means that configuration as code becomes the most important thing that we can do, is to track the configuration of our monolithic application, but have it broken down into the decomposed states. KK wrote a blog recently, many of you probably read it, sort of saying, hey, we got to change the way Jenkins works. And one of the things he said in there which caught my eye is one of the most important things they've done is really started tracking configuration as code. Because we saw that when we started building out our Deploy Hub product. If you think of what that looks like, is you have a package, right? This is your monolithic equivalent, and it's in a box. And the microservices are pieces of that box. They're pieces that go into there. When you ship, though, you don't ship the box anymore. You only ship the piece out. And that package really needs to contain everything that is critical for that particular monolithic equivalent. So, but what we're basically saying is you have to be able to do it better. You have to be able to do it faster. And most of the time, you want to have things that are reusable or open source. So a word from the sponsor here. Deploy Hub is an open source project. It integrates with Jenkins, and it integrates with GitHub. And it allows you to version your configuration as code and deploy it without agents. So if what you're doing today is still on VM or still on physical servers, you can begin thinking in the way of at least deploying individual components out into your production environments. It also provides the reporting that you need to make your ops teams happy. And that's us, GitHub and Deploy Hub, and that's where you can find us. And before we go to questions, there's some white sheets on your, some of you have them, some of you don't. We're giving away 4 Starbucks gift cards. If you don't have a sheet, you just want to put your name down, that works. And right over here in this shelf, there's a bunch of little notepads. If you can just pass those around if anybody needs to fill it out. And we'll just throw. And on that note, while he's doing that, we will open it up for questions for either WebDog or myself. Yes, sir. Yep. This one? Wow, look at that. You know, that's what happens sometimes when we have when we use Keynote and PowerPoint to try to create a.
You had a question in the back? Oh, no. Was that the one you just asked?
What does it say?
Visibility into the microservice.
Components. I don't know. It looks like I should know that because I wrote it, but there's 3 dots. It's okay. I don't know what it says at this point.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm really interested in the idea of like inner sourcing.
Yes.
At my company, and I'm trying to put forward a business case for this. So something that I want to put along with this is some kind of key KPIs. What are the efficacies of doing this? Do you have some tips for kind of the benefits that I'm going to get?
Yes. So one of the best books that you can read if you haven't read it already is Nicole Forsgren's new book about the metrics around DevOps and sort of some of the scientific research that has been done in terms of the KPIs that you're looking for. Now, in terms of the business case, and the question was, how can I drive a business case for inner sourcing within my organization? So I think the biggest business driver is distributing the cost of bugs that are being released to production. Because if we think about what a bug is, it's usually a knowledge gap that has been somewhere within the value chain or within the tool chain. So if we can break down those silos and we can start exposing code to other parts of the organization, there is going to be that difficult part of, oh my God, these code bases aren't as pretty as I want them to be. So you have to like sort of kind of I have to check my ego at the door and sharing that code within the rest of the organization. But what'll happen is other people will start coming in and we'll start being able to contribute to each other's code bases. One of the best things that you can do is open up that visibility, because what it starts doing is it starts mitigating the unconscious bias that we've had with our code bases and the people that we've worked with. One of the things that happens when you're in a siloed organization or you're on that skunkworks project or you're on that project that nobody else knows about is you pick and choose the people that you communicate with. And whether or not you're making a value judgment on the people that you've chosen, you're actually making a bigger value judgment on the people that you're not bringing into the conversation. And so for me, that's a gigantic value proposition, not just from a inclusion standpoint, but also an increase in the global knowledge within the scope of the 4 walls of an organization. So, you know, people talk about tribal knowledge in terms of like, you know, DevOps and all that, but I think it's more of increasing it's getting away from the idea of the tribe and getting into the idea of the globe, so to speak, within the 4 walls. And then I think Accelerate was the name of the book title by Nicole Forsgren. I think she's keynoting tomorrow. Nicole Forsgren, who is also keynoting here tomorrow morning. So, yep, she's fantastic. I love her.
Her book might be around, so.
Yeah. It was not an intentional plug, I promise. Other questions? Yes, sir.
My company is kind of slowly transitioning to DevOps, starting with little pockets or areas within the company. And we're seeing, I guess, ops people that don't want developers with their fingers in the production environment, and developers that don't want ops touching their code. I think you mentioned something about trust in there. What do we do to foster trust between these groups? And
Really the best thing you can do to solve this problem is to solve this problem. Data has to be self-service. Operation teams need to be able to understand what development teams are doing. They need to have a way to make sure that development teams are using the correct version of the infrastructure. That's one of the biggest complaints I hear from operation teams, is that they get to a production release and they find out that something in the infrastructure has to change. We have to stop thinking about these two as different. That's why I was saying we have to think about them as a package, and everything that we need is in that package. It's not just your WAR or your jar file or your DLL. It's the entire package. Once you start doing that, you will start having a conversation with the other side and you'll break this pattern. So that's why I think building it, starting first with a trusted partner, somebody from the development team who's going to work constantly and be on the phone with somebody from the operations team, because what you're doing is creating a natural way of shifting left. But you have to think bigger than just your application, because it's bigger than that. You have to start thinking about the database. You have to think about environment variable settings that might impact production. So you have to see the world from their eyes. And when you do that, you have to then start building out your CI/CD pipeline to help them see into what they need to do as well.
I think internal messaging is super important too. I think one of the biggest speed bumps that a lot of organizations go through is they want the top-down initiative, but they can't necessarily back up those initiatives with actual action and input. So the thing that I'll leave with anybody that's undergoing or being sort of the leader within a digital transformation is you can't define the culture and the community that you're going to build within the four walls of your organization, but you can inspire people to be better. And by that, what I mean by that is, to your example of how do I get ops people to trust that a developer can release to my production environment, well, we stop thinking about it as my environment. It's our environment, and we're all working towards a bigger cause of the software that we're releasing. And that requires time, and it requires our management and our leadership to really drive that messaging forward and to get the right people on board. So if we develop a culture of trust and inclusion and transparency, but we have folks that don't want to be part of that, then perhaps we find them a better place where they have a culture they can fit in with as well. It goes both ways. I know for me, I want to be part of the former. I want to be the trust and transparent.
Related question: do either of you have experience boards that sort of extend that to even the recruiting cycle very early on, bring someone into the organization?
Yeah, I mean, at GitHub, it's part of our recruiting process. So when we think about engineers and we think about folks that we want to bring on to GitHub, it's less about the hard skills that you have as an engineer, because I think for a lot of us, we really pride ourselves on those technical skills. But I think, in my perspective, in my opinion, those skills can be taught. It's a lot of the soft skills that really help organizations succeed. I don't think a DevOps organization succeeds on their heroes. They succeed on the collective effort, in my opinion.
Okay, you guys.
Okay.
Am I doing it?
You two do it. I'll go run around and hand out.
Okay. All right, so let's see.
And in the meantime, we're going to get a big selfie together.
First winner is Brad Thomas. All right, there we go. Perfect.
Smile. You'll see yourself out there in a minute.
All right, let's see. This is not transparent, but I apologize. There we go. That was a bad joke. Laura Hall. Woohoo! Enjoy. I think Tracy can do the other two.
All right, Tracy. Dive in there.
And a woman's name was actually drawn. That's pretty amazing, considering the...
The numbers. Get it?
Jeremy Schneider.
Last one next. Any other questions while we wrap this up?
Oh, to answer that question, I'm sure everyone's asking, we're still two separate companies, business as usual. Because everyone's asking that.
XOOX net a porter.
Column. Right there. Column?
Oh, there we go.
Okay, yeah.
There you go.
Cool.
I was like, that's what the name was.
Thank you, folks.
Yes.
Enjoy lunch. We're going to have GitHub as a booth here. So Tracy and I will be stopping by there throughout the day. So if you have any questions, come find us. Or if you see us just walking around, I'm happy to answer anything. Take care, folks.